développer notre propre souveraineté, parce que les Américains ne vont pas l'assurer tout seuls.
Hello everybody and welcome to this new session. Thank you for joining us for this discussion that will be focusing on artificial intelligence and productivity. Now, of course, the frontier of productivity associated with AI is behind a lot of governments and businesses. But today one might wonder, if we look at the picture and the first applications of AI and what they're offering in terms of productivity, and productivity for whom and why. So to talk about these questions, I have a panel of specialists. So let me introduce myself, Océane Herrero. I work as a journalist at Politico. I'm in charge of AI and new technology. We have with us Mathieu Cortecuisse, who is General Manager of SIA Partners, specialized in the implementation of AI solutions in businesses. Guillaume Liéger, co-founder and General Manager of Explain, focusing on access to public contracts. Mahasti Razavi, who's an associate lawyer at Auguste Debussy, in charge of technology. Ming Zhang, who is a Assistant General Manager at Huawei France. To launch the discussions, I'm going to give the floor to Philippe Aguillon. He is the co-author of a report by the government on AI and the French economy. Hello. It's an honor to be with you. So last year, with Anne Bouvreau, we co-presided a commission on artificial intelligence, and we submitted a report to the President of the French Republic called AI, an Ambition for France, so with different recommendations. And then Anne Bouvreau organized the AI summit that took place last year in Paris. So AI, it's a technological revolution in the full sense of the term. It affects all business areas, the economy, public services, health, education, the organization of labor, media, and culture. And things are going very quickly. Just to give you an idea, it took us 2.5 years for Netflix to achieve 2.5 million users, 2.5 months for Instagram to have 1 million users, and only 5 days for ChatGPT to reach out to 1 million users. So things are going very quickly. So in terms of AI, the vision is optimistic but also pessimistic. I have a colleague who is a Nobel Prize for Economy. We work a lot together. We work on lots of things, but I don't agree with him about AI. His vision is pessimistic. He thinks that AI has very little growth potential and that it's going to destroy a lot of jobs. I believe that AI has an awful lot of growth potential and a potential for creating employment if we put the right policies and institutions behind it. For example, Obama, AI for 10 years, it will give you 0.7 points of extra growth a year. Then it's 1.7 for 10 years. That brings us back down to 1. We can do even better than that. Why does it have a growth potential? It's because it automates tasks, not just for the production of goods and services, but also when it comes to producing ideas. It's easier to have ideas with AI. People who think like Chat Jones or Gordon, that it's easier to have ideas. But with AI, it's easier to have ideas. So there's an awful lot of growth potential. But competition has to adapt to that. If there's no competition, big blocks will have an effect on small ones. So companies who adopt AI, they create jobs. Why? Because they become more productive and more competitive. And so the world demand shows that this needs to be focused on. So the potential for it to be maximized, you need to have a good education system and good flexible security. So if you like, the question that I'm going to ask to you, do you think that AI has a growth potential and a potential for creating jobs? And can the state help? Do we need industrial policies? Do we need public investments? Do we need too many regulations or few regulations? And what about the environment and AI? AI is energy, but Veolia uses AI for detecting problems in terms of water counters. So they're reducing they're reducing the waste that has to be processed. The balance of AI still hasn't been defined. What is your vision in terms of jobs, employment, growth, energy, inequalities relating to artificial intelligence in businesses? Those are the questions. Thank you. Mathieu Courtecrise. So you can open the ball, if you will. So that's a lot of questions to answer at the same time. Now, I'm not as intelligent as AI, so I can't answer everything all in one go. So if we look at the technological aspect, there are studies that have been done. There's a gadget side to this, but there is reality behind it, a scientific reality. The models have good performance in terms of IQ. So we're looking at 136 points and an extra point every month. So we're moving towards 170. So we think that we can move up to 400 in terms of IQ, which is huge. We're talking about, thousands of times more intelligent than Philip. And this is a challenge for all of us. Now, May was asking the question 2 years ago. The question is AI going to provide productivity for employees or replace them? Because that's what people are afraid of. So if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said, well, the idea is an increase, especially when it comes to the service sector. So we're talking about an incremental trend rather than a break. So I've changed my mind. We have a lot of AI projects that we run on a day-to-day basis. And what we're seeing is that, yes, there are always projects that don't have too much productivity, but then there are other projects that provide productivity really massively in the world of work. So then there's the question of adoption. So to be concrete, there's a revolution that's rarely mentioned when it comes to AI, and that is multiple languages. Here, we've moved into a flattening of the world, a new form of globalization. For the first time since the history of humanity, we can talk to each other. So I can talk to Philip in Chinese, and Philip can answer in English, for example. We'll understand each other because we'll be wearing our headsets, and we'll be able to understand each other in real time. And that's not science fiction. Maybe you've already used it. Google has just rolled out technology for video conferencing on their system. So the subtitles are given in real time. And so that's a way of taking part in a video conference. So the circulation of ideas, that's also important. So you're going to be able to have people who are in a back office in India serving a Japanese clientele. So we're supporting a client with 70,000 people in back offices across the world. And thanks to the technology, this multiple language AI and headsets, they can get rid of 1/3 of the people who work. So that's a saving of 20,000 people, and we're only at the first version. So beyond that, from a macroeconomic point of view, and from that point of view, there are thousands and thousands of jobs in AI, in white collars, that are going to be in competition at world level with the labor costs that will vary from one country to another, and sometimes with levels of training and skills that are really quite comparable. So we're moving into a very important area. And it's not science fiction. It's for tomorrow. Thank you, Guillaume Liéger. We've got lots of estimations about the impact of AI on the economy. What is your approach in terms of the impact on productivity? Let me try. Am I Team Philip or Team Daran? I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm delighted to be here and to talk with you. So just to understand my perspective, I've been an AI entrepreneur for 15 years. Explain is a company that tries to simplify workflows around public contracts. We work with about 100 companies like Veolia, Suez, and we try and help them. We facilitate things when they're trying to answer to gain public contracts. So we're talking about 15% of the world GDP. So that's a lot of money. It concerns a lot of jobs. Now, what I would like to start by saying is to take a step back in terms of the phase we are. So the generative AI cycle is fairly classical. As for innovation with the wow effect, the expectations are right up there from the beginning. We thought that ChatGPT, when it came, would be able to do anything. But now we're in a very interesting phase from 2 points of view. The first is that the technological base has continued to progress. The language models today, the reasoning models, are highly powerful, and they are increasing their power every day, and they're less and less expensive. The second element is that the notion of AI verticalization, so specialization, in other words, that has become widespread. So let's take Altman. It's the horizontal AI company, and he said that if I had 24 businesses to create in the future, I would do it based on AI. So coming back to public contracts, that's my point of view. That doesn't mean to say that it applies to the rest of the world. So what we're seeing with AI is that we're finding it difficult to see the effects. A McKinsey report said that among the businesses launching prototypes, 80% abandoned for a very simple reason. They didn't see any scale effect. And I think it's just the start of the story. I have a conviction. Value creation will be based on specialization and AI verticalization. We're already seeing it today. There are lots of examples in coding, in the legal field, for example. Not in the broad sense of the term. You're going to see AI per type of legal proceeding. So I believe in the impact of AI specialization, which is underway. So if I take the example of public contracts, well, we're soon going to publish a white paper. We've asked all our clients and experts across Europe to try and anticipate how AI and public contracts can work together, what effects there might be, as long as we're talking about businesses or public institutions. Now, probably you'll be going to the beach soon, and so you'll be able to read that book. What are we seeing? We're seeing that the effect on productivity and public contracts is already there. So we can divide by a factor of 15 the analysis time of a specifications document. That's real, and that's quite significant. Some of our clients are saying that they can respond to 4 times more calls for tender. And that's an immediate effect. And perhaps to continue, the cost of answering calls for tender for businesses across the world represents 450 billion euros. That's more than the GDP of Denmark. So do you choose between Denmark or public contracts? Anyway, the potential in terms of productivity is absolutely huge. So to finish, perhaps, we're talking about productivity, but productivity, we can use it in lots of different ways. We can say, okay, I'm going to reply to the same number of calls for tender with fewer people, or we can say, no, I'm going to respond to more calls for tender, and that will have effect on my income. And we can also say, I'm going to do things that I couldn't do before. And when it comes to public contracts, that's fundamental. In Europe, 41% of contracts have only one body submitting an offer. When you have one body submitting, it doesn't really work. So with AI, we'll allow businesses who were not doing anything about calls for tender because of the how big the impact was, will be able to. So there'll be an impact on competition, on quality of service. It's 50% of world GDP, but it's also a driver.
Now, to go in line with it, there was a Brinzelson study, my colleague in Stanford, and there's an American company among the 500s, and they give advices to SMEs who want to use software. They have employees all over the world, in the Filipinos. Slowly, they gave access to ChatGPT to their Filipino employees. Those who had access had their productivity increased by 25%. So they created jobs because, of course, since they were more productive, there was more demand for what they do, and they created jobs. So the productivity effects, it's interesting. You know, each time there's been major industrial revolution, we always feared about mass unemployment. When there was the steam, you know, the Luddites movement, the workers who feared the steam, but there was no massive unemployment. So they said there would be massive unemployment. So when robots came, you know, Benoît Hamon said that we had tax robots because robots were going to destroy jobs. No, in no case jobs were destroyed because the productivity effect that I mentioned always took over the substitution effect. It's not uniform on all jobs, but there is a potential for job creation in technological networks. We need a good education system with a good PISA test. We do a lot of effort. We have a lot of efforts to make in France to improve school, and we need a true flexibility like the Danish. When someone loses a job, he gets 90% of his salary for 2 years. He's being trained and he's prepared for a new job. If we had a good educative system and a good flexibility, we are ready to take advantage of this revolution, not only for growth but also for employment. Hasti Razavi, do you see this productivity gain? Well, we're more in the interaction process. I'm very happy to be here with you. And to react to what you were saying is that, in fact, it's a societal choice we're going to make. And it is essential because, of course, everybody wants to have productivity gains. And of course, either we have a very positive vision, which is all great, and it is for our responsibility to have a positive vision of things and the economy, the population, our society. But there are nevertheless a number of organizations and companies which have a vision which is that of replacement of all the individuals' employees in organizations replaced by or because of AI. A major choice will have to be made by all of us, and possibly, to go back to one of the topics you mentioned, the legal and institutional framework can nevertheless, could make it possible to frame some things, just giving time for things to get mature. Every 6 months, we change our position. Every 6 months, our vision on AI, integration of AI usages change because it is such a revolution, and the speed of technology and usage is such that we are constantly adjusting. If we can't find the adjustment with a framework that provides an harmonious evolution, we'll end up in a situation where we could go in all directions. No, the European regulation is dreadful. We can't do what we want. In some cases, the regulations, Europe regulations, local regulations, may indeed be an impediment. But we created a regulation. We're the first in Europe. Some will say great, or others will say why we're regulating again, which said that we're going to create a framework within which we were going to analyze things starting from the risk. We don't want to say if in all cases it was good or not. We'd come, okay, listen, using AI in some cases is not a good idea. Example, to do a social rating. We tell a company that if it wants to have an AI system, if it wants to use an AI system that would enable a social rating, in this case, we're in the red category, you're not allowed to do it. So does it stop innovation? No. We can innovate using and deploying other measures. So what we see today in businesses, because I'm a lawyer and my practice, you know, we help companies in their reflection. We've gone from absolute shyness, which emerged with ChatGPT, you know, and all of us, we wanted to block everything, to slow down everything, but you can't slow down something that has already been integrated. ChatGPT was deployed, used by millions of people, you know, after a couple of hours. So then, having tried to stop this, creating charter and rules and information that would block all the topics, we said, okay, well, actually, we might gain something from it, but we don't know what. So let's framework this in-house. And then a certain number of companies said, oh, well, I can try to push, I can promote IA usages, but if I try to achieve a kind of a global agreement where large corporations, groups would agree on usages, but which keep a part of ethic. But with AI, which is interesting, we talk about productivity, when we talk about all possible domains of usage, each time there is a limit to say, okay, is this ethical? Is this going to be, you know, and a certain number of people and companies, organizations got together to say, okay, let's try to do something that will reassure the businesses, organizations, citizens, states, but at the same time could try to promote things. And the question on productivity, which was of interest to us and animates us, well, we're going to see the fruits between now and soon. And if we were to meet again in 6 months, we might not see the thing the same way. I want to say one word about the regulations. We have to be protected. We need regulations. The question is, what approach to the regulation? Well, there is the RGDPs, okay, which as well exported. But you know, to help individually countries include their regulation. For the health care data, so we need the commission to have authorizations with they said, okay, stop that. So we received a request. So no longer preliminary authorization. So I think it's important to have the good regulations, because what happens when there are too much regulation, large companies, they know how to deal with it, but new players don't know how to deal with it. And it minimizes competition, but we want competition. Competition helps innovation. Without competition, you know, competition is key in innovation. We have new entries. If too much regulation will affect competition, so we need good regulations, proper regulations, especially in the healthcare data. We said they should longer need a preliminary authorization for researchers to get access to healthcare data. So, I mean, we have to regulate it in a smart way without affecting competition, because competition is absolutely important. This is why competition is important, you know. It's open source regulation, but not too much regulation. But Digital Market Act expanded to entire value chain of AI, including the cloud. You need competition and good industrial policy, and I think it was the pillars of our report. Regulation, yes, but good regulations, which do not stop new entries. Minojong, about the benefits of artificial intelligence, do you think as well that competition will make it possible to have... Thank you. I think indeed competition is important. Competition is the driver for innovation, and it is with innovation and thanks to innovation that we can make headways. Let me come back following the regulation. Let me come back to a vision, industrial vision. At Huawei, we work on the AI, you know, for years now, and you know, Huawei, we are the suppliers of innovative technologies in digital, telcos, and today, for the few years now, we work also on global digital transformation in terms of digital and also in the domain of energy as well. I'll stop now for enterprises. Now, our vision for AI is that it is a technology. We may use revolutionary technology. Why? Because in fact we have a vision of AI. It's more than 98%. We work on B2B applications, industrial production, and so on and so forth. So we developed a model, LLM model called Banku, and in this model we developed about 10 domains, as you said, Guillaume, early on. We work on those domains because we believe in this technology, which could bring us benefits in terms of productivity, and for each domain. From one domain to the other, things are different. From one company to the other, it's very different. Everything is, depends on how far you want to go, or in the depth, breadth and depth. When you say you want to respond to call for tenders for public markets, well, we've developed models in research for drugs and medical drugs, and of course it shortens the duration of research, but in a drastic way. We are talking about a few months versus a few years. So and we work on AI solutions to work in mine sites, exploitation sites, extraction sites. So we talk about replacing workers, but it's simple replacement. It is replacement with innovation, and mainly it reinforces security. It reduces the occupational accidents, especially deadly or lethal accidents, and this is why we increase productivity. All this together, when we talk about AI, the productivity, in this wide meaning of the word, there are three points which are essential. What is in productivity, okay? And then what's recommended as well. So there is also the question of safety or security on building site exploitation or in ports, maritime ports. How can we transform and remove accidents or make sure there will be no lethal occupational hazards? And thanks to this technology in ports and elsewhere, and this technology, we talk about research in medical drugs, we shorten the duration of research, and then we can either have more choice in the drugs, or we can do with a reduced cost. And of course, it is very much in line with what Philippe was saying early on. It is our vision is very positive on these new technologies, and of course, assuming that we use it in sensibly, we know how to do that. Thank you. Mats, you mentioned the European AI Act. A certain number of companies recently signed a tribune to say that this should be put to pause. Now, in the current context of international competition, do we have time, freedom to regulate AI in the European level, anywhere, regional level? We are in a global trend in which the regulations are the barriers or impediments. Some regulations are so constraining, stringent on a daily basis, not just because of their concept or clearly those are regulations that block companies, and especially European companies, in their deployment, expansion, profitability, and so on and so forth. Without giving you absurd acronyms, you might have heard about DSRD, CS3D, you name it, they got it. So the question on the AI Act is interesting, because when you look at what is in the AI Act. It's long. I spent nights reading. I fell asleep 52 times before I could read the bloody thing. So for the first time, we had a very innovative vision to create this text. We said, okay, what's the risk that could be created by an AI? And as a function of the typology of risk, I will say it's possible. I would say it's possible in some conditions. I would say there is no topic, no issue, do whatever you want. 80% of AIs we see, that you see on a daily basis, in fact, they are not regulated. There is no problem in terms of AI, none. So this share of the text is not impacting our daily activities of what we do, us on this domain. But there is a category of topics which are prohibited. I said, for example, we said, okay, no, don't do social rating. I'm not sure that if I ask you to raise your hand, who think it's really good to do rating your social rating, you would raise your hand. So to consider that some things are actually not so acceptable from a societal level is not an issue for me. What is complicated in the AI Act is the mechanics that has put in place to tell a company how you're going to decide if you're in 1, 2, 3, 4 category, but to make sure that you're in these categories, one of these categories, you have to create a committee 1, committee 3, working group, ad hoc reporting tables. This is the mode of operation which is on strengths, but not so much the philosophy, not so much the objectives.
So maybe we can do better, perhaps. Perhaps we wanted to be too perfect and there's something good about that or not. But the idea of creating more competitiveness, I'm not sure. We forgot to mention that we're good at believing what we're told. And there are lots of regulations in other countries concerning AI. But we never hear about that either. So we have the impression that as poor Europeans, we're being subject to something that others are not being subjected to. And what's extraordinary is that, we've got to have the reality of the situation before we can say whether we agree or not. So there's a kind of a trade-off, as they say in English. If we're too restrictive, people will go and see elsewhere. So sometimes it's a bit like the La Fontaine fable. If we're too rigid, we break things. So maybe we need to say, okay, we need a minimum amount of regulations, the essential regulations, and then we'll leave the rest for later on. So do a minimum number of things, protection of individuals, but really a minimum protection. And I think that's probably the right approach, because otherwise the risk is that AI is done elsewhere. And so it will be the Chinese, the Americans who will be involved and not us. It will take place in places where there are no regulations. There will be a race to develop AI. We have competitive rules in Europe. Perhaps we're not bold enough. Perhaps, we need to compete with the United States and China. So we're very inward-looking when it comes to competition. So let's move away from AI. So we focused on environment. We had a punitive approach to environment. The carbon tax, I'm for the carbon tax, but I'm not just for the carbon tax. I'm for a green industrial policy. Why did we have the yellow jackets in France? Because people had no alternative to their diesel car. And so the price of diesel went up, but there was no alternative transport provided because we don't have an industrial policy. And I think it's the same thing. I think there's going to be a rejection of climate measures if we're just getting a stick and no carrot. It's important to offer possibilities. We need a state investing in industrial policy that's proactive. We need the minimum, just the right amount. Why is Europe dropping out compared with the United States? Because we missed the information technology revolution. So we mustn't do the same thing with AI. If we have too many regulations, this is what will happen. So we have to have intelligent minimum regulations and then do things ex post and then make investments. That's my feeling. If I may, isn't the real subject about financing, how to finance businesses who have an awful lot of talent, rather than the question of regulations? Yes, there's the question of financing, but there's also the question of adoption. What are the obstacles to adoption today? Well, not regulations. This debate is really fundamental. The AI Act. We are a specialized actor. We proactively contacted the European Commissioner and the team in charge of that, and we were never listened to. So good regulations, Philippe, these are things that are built with people who are affected by the regulations. And that was not the case. There were attempts, but it didn't work. So let me give you a counterweight with a good example of regulation, the regulation about public contracts. A public contract is a pain. I don't know if you've already tried to respond to a call for tender for a public contract. And that's for very good reasons. Behind it's to fight against corruption, to make sure that there's transparency, to make sure that competition is fair. And that's why the procedures are very organized. And it's a good example because there are fundamental problems that I've just cited. The good news is you can remove part of the complexity by using AI in the right way. So the adoption subjects today, what are they? Well, adoption is not a problem because the hardship of tasks is evident for businesses. There's one subject that I've talked about with a number of business heads during the rencontre. It's easy to convince top management that a certain number of specific jobs will be transformed. We have to be closer to the field. In many big groups, there's very little incentive for people in middle management. Very few people are ready to take any risks. So if there's something that might encourage the adoption is to talk about use cases that work, to share success stories about AI so that nobody is sanctioned when they devote a new process to a startup that was created 12 months beforehand. And to come to financing, I don't think that there's a problem as such in terms of financing. There's lots of money that can be rolled out in France. But that money has to be rolled out tactically. And we don't have enough tactics in Europe. We're still a little bit naive, but that's not the subject today. And in terms of financing, let me tell you where there are sources of financing. Resilience funds for COVID, 600 billion euros. We only spent half of it. So we've got interests that we can still use. And France 2030, I think that part of that will be deployed to AI, or it could be deployed to AI. So we now have to invest in defense. It's not just about munitions and tanks, though. It's not what we had in the Great Wars. It's about AI and drones. Mathieu. Yes, I agree with one thing. It's very important. Let's take the example that I'm familiar with. The company Huawei that I work for, we invested last year, so a year ago, $24.8 billion. So if we are where we are today, it's because we worked on a global strategy. We work on CTI technologies, CIT technologies, transformation, energy transition, and investment is very important. Especially the right investment has to be made. Mathieu Courtecuisse, what is the right investment, in your opinion? We were talking about the difficulty of having European AI businesses faced with American competition. So investing in American solutions, is that the right way forward? Well, I'm cross. I'm cross because this panel, well, I live in the United States. So we've been talking for about 30 minutes, and 27 minutes have been spent on regulations. I don't know whether you realize how absurd that is to talk about regulations. so much. I think we haven't even given the word innovation in what we've said. So the big beautiful bill was introduced in the United States. So bill has just the bill has forbidden to regulate AI. So they've decided to re-centralize regulation, and so it's all about deregulation now in the United States. So ChatGPT so the CCPA, that's the equivalent in California, it's going to be withdrawn. So what we're seeing is deregulation or a disconnection in terms of regulations between the United States and Europe. We're seeing today that a certain number of American technologies that are made in America are no longer rolled out in Europe. We already have productivity in Europe, and that is encouraging European companies to relocate to other areas in terms of AI research and application. So there's no border to productivity for a certain number of jobs. Once an application has been developed, often it can be deployed globally then. So perhaps we should stop talking about regulations all the time. I hope we have a moratorium on the AI Act, which is awful. It was put together by technocrats who don't even understand how these technologies are made. And then at a given point in time in the United States, they decided to speed things up. And let me give you a figure which reflects the world of work. I saw a study, it came out in the Wall Street Journal about 10 days ago. The number of white-collar workers in the United States went down by 7%. And in this study, we see the fact that middle management is being withdrawn the most. So 2 to 3 times as fast as in Europe. So they're changing things. They're changing employment already in the United States. We're moving to a radical phase of simplification of organizations, driven by new competition from organizations with few employees or no employees who are competing with established businesses. And that's happening now. Now, regulations, that's not what we should be talking about. I'd just like to add one last point. In terms of macroeconomic indicators in the United States, unemployment is still low, but we're seeing an increase in the unemployment rate of young graduates. What's happening then? The business heads in the United States are beginning to hesitate to take on young graduates. They're not always very well trained. And the training, they are thinking about using productivity instead. So you're not going to. So if you take on somebody and you train them, are they going to stay with you? So we're still at the beginning of the curve, but it's a movement that is emerging. And when I talk with business heads in the United States, they say we don't want to take on young graduates anymore. So this raises a number of questions. So you were talking about industrial jobs, but I think there's an incremental effect here. But in the service sector, there's a fundamental question with respect to white-collar workers. There's a new wave of Uberization. We saw it already a few years ago with a relationship to work, with a contract that needs to be rethought, with contractual forms that need to be rethought. There's another act that is being negotiated in the States. It focuses on investment. It's being driven by Michael Dale. There, the idea is that young people, baby businesses today, will benefit from $1,000 so that they can start to save, to prepare their financial capital and prepare for the future world of work. So 300 euros. Now, we leave behind debts for our children. So this is something that's being set up now. There's a reconfiguration of a new relationship to work that we are seeing over there.
Mingong Zhong, is this a new form of social contract that should be invented? I think that, yes, today For years now, we've been talking about AI, and we mentioned early on in the various domain AI, and we talked, it's true, we talked a lot about regulations and so on and so forth. So I think that, yes, we should let innovation take a breath, to drive innovation on site, on applications, so on and so forth. Yes, of course. We talk about AI today, but we didn't talk about intermediary step, which is the digital transformation step. A company today is it organized with infrastructures, connected, and so on and so forth. Let's take an example of a production plant. The step which is already connected machine that can function, also somehow automatic. On the fully transformed steps, I visited a factory in China which is fully transformed. It is not yet fully AI, but it is simply transformed into digital of all the machines. In a football field, there are about 20 large machines. They make spare parts for the automotive industry. I stayed half an hour. It was hot, wet, humid, but I met 20 employees. Nobody works in front of the machine. Everything is automated. So clearly, I mean, this is digital transformation. Then, with these infrastructures established, we can talk about applications of AI. How do we do? Well, AI, there is also a level on AI. So, of course, we are experiencing a transition which is digital. We add AI, so certain form of intelligence, and also we are facing a huge energy challenge, environmental challenge. So indeed, I think we can no longer just sit down, let's remain seated on the model today. We have to be flexible, we have to be active and dynamic, and we have to review the social model, which is not only, well, there is a new technology that has arrived, which is impacting more or less in various domain and AI. Then we need to reorganize with the state, with the companies, with the politics. We don't, as you said, so we don't to foster the delocalization. I think or offshoring. There is a point we mentioned with Philippe at the table. So how do we move? How do we move on alone, or do we move on by establishing partnerships? Because today, what Eric was saying early on, there is no border for technology. So clearly, we have to work in a smart way, and we have to establish partnerships and make sure that everything will move on for the technology. I want to mention something. We did a study for the report, survey out of 9,000 companies which adopt AI or not. We saw globally companies which adopt AI increase jobs. They could be, so these are statistics in many companies. Now, it's not uniform, but when it's jobs which are highly exposed to AI, where most of the tasks can be replaced by AI, and AI used for administrative functions, well then, it has a negative effect. But you need those conditions. That is, highly exposed job highly exposed to AI, and they are used in administrative function. If it is AI for security, for production, and so on, even there, it doesn't have a negative effect. Clearly, there are jobs which are exposed, but globally, for the time being, on the studies we have, we see a positive effect because companies which adopt AI become more productive, they increase their turnover, and they hire more people. This effect globally seems to be dominant. It might change in 50 years, but for the time being, this is the case. So what I say, moreover, that we need a new education system, a new school, because at school we learn to learn. You learn to be adaptable. This is the basis, and and then you have a good system for flexi security. Or you lose a job, you're retrained, you are get an insurance, and you react to a new job. we have to see AI in a different way. We should not be shy. We should have the good institutions, but for the time being, these studies that show a positive effect of AI, not uniformly positive, but globally positive of AI on employment. I can confirm, Philippe, the examples I talked about. We worked for a few years on about 10 domains. We deployed AIs in different domains, and indeed, each time there is an increase of productivity but there is also economic productivity, but also safety in different sectors at the level of safety and security, and especially jobs which are exposed to risk. Earlier on, I was talking about the exposition of mines, operation of mine. Mining industry, the mining industry. We're working with a connected 5G. We can go down the mine pits to make sure that the workers we will not be exposed to enjoying productivity and the benefits for the company, but for the workers, etc. And for the consumers, it's very beneficial. Monsieur Azavi, do we need a US model and let AI take over in such a liberal way in the economic life? AI is here, and it is being adopted, even though in some domains, it is slower. But the reality is that it is here in our daily life, in the daily life of every company, and some don't see a future without implementing AI based on their activities. So I do believe that to dream thinking about changing culture and to become the US could be good, bad, I don't know. It's not the point. We're a country, we have our story. Europe has its own story. I don't want to, but we do have a base, and the topic is what's the best profit we can gain from that. And I do believe, once again, I remain very convinced that it's not just regulation in terms of AI that stops innovation. Reality is that to read the text and to understand is one thing, it's irreversible religion, but nothing in that text stops anybody from really do something amazing. Nobody is blocked, and we cannot be created. We have several champions in France. Mistral, amazing. We see smaller companies. Guillaume had to move, but anyway, mega success. So you can see that reality is not just regulation. It is the desire to conquest, to go beyond, and which is what we have to anchor in the pathway you mentioned of studies and that of conquest. Regulation is the Zakowski next to it. It's the Draghi report. I have a session with Mario Draghi. What does he say, Draghi? What stops rupture innovation in Europe? Each country has its own regulation. So there is no true market for innovation. So people who innovate don't have any innovation rent in Europe because each has its own market. So we need a single market. We don't have a financial ecosystem for innovation. We don't have any capital risk for underdeveloped or industrial investors. So we don't need a capitalization system, the Swedish. So, and then we don't have the RPAS, the equivalent of the defense advanced project in Europe, and we don't have a true funding of fundamental research. The IMPO research, maybe it stops the delocalization, the offshoring, but it doesn't do the rupture innovation. So de la BEX, yes. So be it fundamental research, DARPA, or a single market financial ecosystem, or this is what's missing in Europe to produce innovation. Could we have a roving microphone? Thank you. Questions, not comments. Questions, not short questions, not comments. Maybe a question that might annoy Mr. Mr. Aguillon. I want to decenter and I will talk to the other participants, maybe for the others who didn't speak enough. So maybe we should pull out of the black box of the company upstream. Pay attention to children today who are the AI children. They should start to the autonomy efforts. So what will they be tomorrow as employees? That's the first question, and it could be interesting. And downstream, the cost for the environment. Well, maybe this will be an obstacle for the development of AI.
Beaucoup dans les savoirs de base. Vous savez, aux États-Unis, ils ont fait une expérience, c'est les No Excuse Charter School, dans les zones défavorisées. C'est quoi? C'est l'accent est mis sur la littérature, la lecture, la dictée, le calcul, les devoirs faits à l'école, le raisonnement, très peu d'accès aux écrans et le tutorat pour les élèves en difficulté. Je crois beaucoup dans ça. Donc moi, je suis pour l'école vraiment sur ces choses-là. C'est-à-dire que c'est fondamental. Effectivement, il y a le danger que l'écran ait un accès trop rapide. Je suis totalement de votre côté. Donc je suis très traditionnel sur l'écran. Je crois vraiment dans la maîtrise des savoirs de base. Je laisse mes autres parler. J'ai trop parlé.
Mathieu Courtecuisse, quelle éducation
Alors moi, je voulais répondre.
Maybe I can answer Philippe. The role of DARPA in the deployment of regenerative AI is zero. The role of the development of physical AI is zero. Why? Because with respect to the fundamental budget of, if we take the Maximans and the biggest technology companies in the United States, the ratio is 1 to 20 in terms of fundamental research. We don't need DARPA anymore. That's a reflex from last century. Today we have companies that have enough capital to be involved in breakthrough technology without being influenced by the state. The only role of the state, it's not to regulate but to order, buy technology produced by private companies. And when it comes to what's happening to the AI revolution underway, generative AI comes from consumers. Companies today, I don't know which companies have been queried for measuring AI rollout. We're not even at the start. However, in the world of consumption, in the world of education, it's already there because consumers are using it, citizens are using it. This is what happened in e-commerce 20, 30 years ago. They're the ones behind it. They're the ones adopting it. Another question from the public? I think we need a CERN in Europe for AI, and I agree with that proposal. Hello. So I asked AI to formulate my question for me. So I am a project manager in IT, and I'm a trainer at a school in Aix-en-Provence. So there was a remark made with respect to certain business heads who find it difficult, who don't want to recruit young graduates. So my question is, well, what kind of young graduate profile are we talking about? Is there a lack of interest in certain targets? And my question is, AI presents as a new frontier for productivity. Why not take on graduates who are more used to it, instead of entrusting it to managers who are already in place? Well, that wasn't really what I was trying to get at. The reality is that the employment market, the labor market, is becoming polarized. On the one hand, you've got people who are very good at mathematics and science and who are on high demand. There are people who are extremely creative. So there are lots of opportunities for people like that. On the other hand, we're seeing, so I was referring to the traditional American bachelor. They have a general training. What we're seeing in the United States at the moment is that the pay for somebody with a bachelor's and somebody who doesn't have a bachelor's is the same. they're earning the same. So companies are no longer buying the training that is carried out in universities. So that's a huge challenge for the university world. They have to reinvent what they're doing. Either we're moving towards a world where education cycles are shorter, so that would be a break with respect to what we were familiar with last century, or the companies themselves will be moving on to learning logics that are earlier, 18, 17, 18-year-olds. So it's because they will be more open to learning about AI. So lots of companies are doing this in the United States. And so they're creating their own training institutes. And that's something that's new to American history. And there's a certain mistrust of, in terms of the quality of education at universities. And a question? Hello. My question is to know how AI can reduce social and economic inequalities and how we can improve employees' situation in terms of productivity. I can maybe answer that. The Brindle study showed that those who benefited most from AI in companies were people who were the less productive and with the least experience. So that's where inequalities were reduced. But in terms of recruitment, it might make them even worse. So the effects of inequalities from AI are ambiguous. You can't just give a black and white answer. But I think once again that this is where the educational system is important, that social mobility is important, and that we really need to have a system like the Scandinavian model. I like the Danish model. I think we need a Danish social model so that we can make sure that AI can help. It's not about being for or against inequality. It depends on the institutions that you have. If you have Scandinavian-style institutions, I'm pretty sure that we would be able to increase production and employment and not make inequalities bigger. So if we had an American social system, I would be very pessimistic. I'm very much against that, and I'm for the Scandinavian model. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you for taking part in this session with us.
bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Merci de nous rejoindre pour cette...
Thank you for your presence for the new controversy. The objective would be to talk about the limited low progression of unskilled workers. It is something that can it be changed? To answer this question, Marie-Ange Debon, president of the of Keolis, which is a affiliate of SNCF, which of course has to deal with this on a daily basis. And you know, we used public transport. And next to her, Pierre-André de Chalandard, former president of Saint-Gobain, who today is president of the Institute of the Enterprise, of the Industry of Fabric, and the president of the Surveillance Committee of the Council of ESSEC. So, well, the idea is to talk about a topic which is at the heart of our the news. The true question today, is there a future, and how do we manage the future of unskilled labor today? And is there or low-skilled labor? You know, we know that in the past, major managers such as Jürgen Schrepp, who started as an apprentice within Mercedes, became the boss of Daimler-Benz. Is it still possible? 2 minutes, maybe, to do a first observation? Madame Marie-Ange? 2 minutes. You gave the example, right? It's amazing because at Keolis, until recently, the manager of the US, who manages 1 billion turnover in Keolis, with David Scorey, he started at age 16, as a supervisor and a foreman. We're not talking about France or the social regime. We have the vocational training, but you know, he's going to retire, and this is a clear example of applied to Keolis. We are a service company, so a lot of collaborators. For me, what it is, social, you know, I don't, well, in the public transport business and in companies like Keolis, clearly, it says things can be changed, you know, through vocational training progression. Collaborators can evolve and move up the scale and move up the ladder. And we get people who have absolutely no training whatsoever, and we can even come without even being a driver, without driving license, you know. They get training, they get their driver's license, so there is no need for a university, academic pathway, a career. And then, of course, there is training, polyvalence, progression. And there are sectors. I mean, does it apply to other sectors? Well, maybe we could be more cautious, but the public transport domain is a clear, marked example of things that can be changed, you know, the growth of for low-skilled workers. Mr. de Chalandard. Sometimes it is considered that the employees are considered invisible in the industry. Is it a topic, or do you end up with the observation made by Marie-Ange Debon about the role and the possible progression of those employees? Well, I think the topic of low-skilled workers is a quite significant stake, especially if it generates frustration. And we can see that if it comes with a feeling of frustration or degrading, it can generate anger, you know, the yellow jacket, and it's and it is a social aspect which is essential for the country. Now, if we want to see who are the low-skilled workers, well, four aspects are essential. Most of them are in the tertiary domain, services. Historically, they were more in the industry. Why are less in the industry? Why are they less in the industry? Now, for two reasons. One, which I find bad, that there is less industry, so that's not good news. And one, which is good, which that in the industry experiences more changes than the services in terms of technology, in terms of productivity. Productivity in the industry was high, so there are changes in the type of jobs, and therefore we need to train, and therefore There is high qualification. All the automation, all the automation waves were causing less jobs for low-skilled people. So it's more for the services. So I'm calling, I want reindustrialization of France, but we have to be realistic. It's not by going from 10 to 12, 15% of leisure employment that we're going to solve the problem of low-skilled workers. But it's interesting because it confirms the role of social lift, which was the case of industry. So it's an issue. I did not quite face it at Saint-Gobain, where the skills, is quite natural. Training is done. Second characteristics, and this is why it could become a social stake. The second characteristic is that there are more women, more young people, 15 to 24, in low-skilled workers. They are often unemployed, more often unemployed, and it is for all of them, they have a lower working period time and this is French specificity, because otherwise we find the same characteristic in other countries. But in France, is that we have a high percentage of part-time jobs, and that concerns the low-skilled workers. So there is clearly something at stake here, which has to be solved, and we have to do it, and especially in domains where the issue arises, but not in the industry. So, as a reaction, where André is right at one point there, there's one of the last point, which is often one of the issues that we combine several problems in one. So, one which is, the hardness of work. There is it's hard jobs, or hardship labor. And second topic are the single parents families, women mainly. 80% of single parent families are women, are actually headed by women. And when you have low skill, hardship, hard work, and a single parent family, in fact, you make the topic more complex to be dealt with. So often there is a barrier because there are several negative factors that have to be worked on. But those are often jobs which are under tension, and it's difficult to find jobs or to find employees. You explain it in your once in a while, saying that recruitment sometimes is in some professions, not for you, but we know in restaurants, hospitality, and they even use immigration, and sometimes undocumented immigration. We remain a profession under stress for 3 or 4 years. We multiplied action, but an example to show the capacity of integration, we've worked with the Association of Inclusion through Sport, and you see people who are very far from work or employment, young people who can't get up in the morning, but when it means going to a football field, the soccer field, they can be motivated. What we've done through insertion through sport, we saw a phase which is in time. First, collective work. We had the teams would go to the stadium, support accompany the young people. Then we would take them to training, and then we show them work, money, and you get them back into professional life pathway. And then you have to manage the career evolution, such as polyvalence, salary increase, because there must be fees. Promotion can be hierarchical or it can be financial. At the end, eventually, today, one of the problems, don't you think it could be the fact that we are more in a polyvalence dimension? People should evolve in different professions, but it's not a social progression as we've known it in the past. Mr. Chalambard. Well, progression can be seen in two ways. It is a progression in terms of content, of labor, and clearly there is a vertical element historically. And what we can see is that in many service jobs, There is the education to management doesn't exist in initial trainings, unlike what we have more often in technical training. So yes, if there is training for management is lower, well, the possibility for promotion, vertical promotion, is more limited. In many service professions, it's more difficult. Then there is the issue of mobility, professional mobility or geographic mobility. And there, what strikes me is that there is a difference, more depending on the size of the company. And the size of the company, when you are in a certain large, medium or large size company where there are human resource manager service, there are, and therefore they pay attention to these topics, and which is a bit of a luxury when the company is smaller. Let me give you an example. When you do recruitment,
Dans les différentes
So in the different subsidiaries of Saint-Gobain, we very rarely recruit somebody for the job that they're actually going to do. We recruit somebody with the idea that, we think about what they can do with that person for the next 5 or 10 years, and at all levels. In an SME, you recruit people for a specific job. So if you're recruiting somebody for 5 to 10 years' time, then training is much more natural. So this training, is it training of middle managers, Mrs. Dubon, identifying talents for jobs that we sometimes consider as invisible? Do we have to change the way we look at the whole system? Well, two things. With respect to versatility. Versatility, we think of it from 2 points of view for organization of work. If you have drivers who can drive buses, trams, and subway, then your organization is much more flexible. But also from the point of view of the employees, when they prefer working in the subway, they prefer to be closed off from the public, they might have different expectations, and they might want to move towards controllers or drivers, for example. They can go up the management pyramid. In other words, they're drivers to begin with, but then they can be supervisors. On some lines, you can have drivers who supervise. A driver can have the responsibility of 50 other drivers. They started as drivers, or they can be behind screens in the control room. So there's a lot of variety, there's a lot of versatility, there's a possibility for promotion. But one thing that we pay attention to is that, there's a middle management layer where we worked a lot at Keolis. It was the idea of learning what leadership is. We're not talking about being part of an executive committee. We're talking about how do you motivate 50 drivers? What messages do you share with them? How do you give them prospects? How do you explain to them what the company is doing and where it's going? So it's not something that's innate. It's something that you have to learn. But it's about motivating the troops, motivating employees, and it's about giving them career prospects. And versatility, this means training, right, which is what you do. And if I think about things, putting Keolis to one side, it's a very virtuous company. But for those who are low-skilled, if we take the national statistics, 72% of employees on average have had training. So this dates back to 2022. 27% of low-skilled workers received training in 2022. So we're creating a vicious circle, therefore. We're training people who are already qualified. So training people who are not qualified. So obviously big companies do this, but globally not often. Now, what about the return on investment? Is it complicated for long-term training? Is that why? And the economic interest is not in line with what is being done? Well, when you have a medium-term vision of employees, you invest in training. When you recruit people, you look at the job and you wonder whether to train the person. If you don't have the right framework, general management framework, well, you hesitate because you think, oh, this person's going to leave as soon as they're trained. But training demands a lot of effort and it involves a lot of people. Now, companies shoulder the responsibility mainly, but then there's the French system, the idea of pooling training. That's also something that's very important. It's important to work with the most fragile members of the general public as well, because, you know, you can have training organized by businesses, but on top of that, how do you target those that are exposed to a lot of hardship? And this often starts, you know, with the fact that they don't master French. How do you start with basic training with people like this? And if you have single parents as well, how do you provide support to them? How do you give them time for training? Now, one of the subjects that has come up over the past 3 days is the subject of artificial intelligence. So we've got a few minutes left. Now, today, what will artificial intelligence have in terms of impact on these low-skilled workers? Will it, in the future, give them a new lease of life in terms of their jobs, or on the contrary, will they wonder if it's going to be a negative impact? Can we just bring up another subject first? When we talk about, you know, the prospects of these workers, we're talking about career prospects, versatility, but you know, we're also talking about remuneration. Now, that we have a real problem in France with our systems where we're trying to reduce costs. Well, that's because there are too many costs. So we're trying to reduce costs on low salaries. In France, compared with other countries, we have a lot of employees who have a minimum wage. So when we're reducing costs at that level, for an employee might have 100 euros more, you've got to provide 2.4. And if I take the point of view of the employee, from the point of view of their income, they've got an increase in 100 euros, but they'd have to have 580 because of the bonuses that are available. So there is no incentive to increase the salary for the employee and for the employer. So that's a huge obstacle. So let's finish with AI. There is a controversy, and I'd like to play devil's advocate here. What is the notion of a decent salary? Do all companies, you know, have the same approach? And then there's the notion of sharing added value. Are we doing things as efficiently as we can in businesses with respect to employees? What about, you know, your remuneration system itself and how it follows a hierarchy? And so there are questions relating to this aspect. You know, how do you share the value created? It's a very complex question. So for AI, there are two ideas, two theories. Some people say it's going to be a revolution in all sectors, especially at the intermediate level. There'll be even more low-skilled labor. So that's the first theory, and it's the theory we hear most often. Now, my experience of previous waves of automation, is AI like robotization? I don't know, but it's not exactly the contrary either. We've been through successive waves of automation. What I'm seeing is after several years. All of these waves of technological progress and automation, at the end of the day, this was good for qualifications, and that's why we have fewer low-skilled workers in industry. So it wasn't bad in terms of employment, so it wasn't bad. So there are two theories, and I think my theory, the one I prefer, is a minority theory, but we'll only know, in the future. It's very disruptive, yes. So the cards are reshuffled because of that. The relationship of people to digital technologies is pretty complex. It's segmented. In the studies that we do, for example, we see elderly people who, they don't know what to do with digital technology. But it's more complicated than that, in fact, because there's a whole share of population who, as of 65 and 70, they became quite agile from a technical point of view. Then there are the very young who never had the basics. Now, they might be very agile on their phone. And then there are others who might be quite disturbed by digital technology. So the impact of AI means that we have to rethink training entirely. And that is a big problem when we think about our jobs and sectors generally speaking. How do we train people in sciences, in maths, especially young people? We're not very good at this. Girls especially are not as well trained for different cultural reasons, including if we take the latest reforms. So mathematics and science classes, they're still problematic. So to conclude, we've just got 1 minute left. Are you optimistic with respect to the ability to allow for social prospects, or you're pessimistic? I'm pessimistic. There's a major factor at the moment that we're hearing about, and that is changes to population numbers. We're seeing the results already. So for a year and a half now, we've got a climate that's not as good. Everybody's seen an increase in unemployment. There are fewer people arriving on the labor market. So changes to population are having a consequence on the labor market. This means that the relationship between companies and employees are going to change, that companies, well, today, they're already finding it difficult to recruit. It won't get any better. If they want to recruit in the future, they will have to be more attractive. So they need to get to grips with the problems. So that means that low-skilled labor, well, it means there has to be a project. There has to be some kind of collective pride generated. So tasks need to be seen as more attractive. And that's important for companies that want to keep hold of their employees. So the populations that are arriving on the labor market today are really quite different. Their relationship to temping is quite difficult. They're quite happy with short-term contracts and temping work, perhaps more so, more comfortable with that than with a long-term contract. And some people are working twice as hard. They have two jobs. So collective agility, and this short-term vision. We're no longer thinking about pursuing the same career for our whole lives. This is disruptive, but it also shows our constant ability to adapt, and companies need to adapt to employees because the power struggle has been reversed today in terms of supply and demand when it comes to work. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions.
Bonjour à tous et
Good afternoon. Welcome to this session. It's hot, but we're going to travel this session. So I invite you to stay. It's called Soft Power, you know, and facing the world tensions. Stéphanie Antoine, I'm on France 24 in the discussion. So I will be the facilitator of this session with Françoise Benamou, who is a member of the Cercle des Économistes, and they will introduce the session. And I will introduce the members of the panel. So Pierre Lévy, former French ambassador in Russia. Next to him, Vladimir Norov, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan, as well as Secretary General of the Organization of Cooperation in Shanghai. And you were also Uzbekistan ambassador in several European countries. Naima Korchi, founder and president of the Pan-African Women Forum, and the head office is in Morocco, and former civil servant in the United Nations. Sujeev Shakia, who is with us, it is CEO of the Nepal Economic Forum and author of Unleashing Nepal, and it is also a territorist in the Kathmandu Post. Franco Bruni is with us. Yeah. So, Vice President of the Italian Institute for International Political Affairs. François Benamou, who is an economist and president of the Cercle des Économistes, will kick off the session with the introduction to kick off the discussion. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. And we have a good session. So I will simply introduce rapidly, with a few elements, the soft power. We all know it. So maybe a couple of points to remind you. I was trained by Joseph Nye, American in 1990. He died last year. And he was professor at Harvard, which is attacked because of the end of soft power. Former undersecretary under the Carter administration. It is soft power, as you know, the ability to influence others through attraction, persuasion, rather than coercion. So it is a strong idea that is anchored in many elements of U.S. history, and possibly the role of Hollywood after the war, which was most important in that aspect. There's been variants. We talked about smart power, need for a strong army, alliances, partnership, institutions at every level. So we talked about the soft power, that is all influence actions from the regimes, authoritarian regime. We'll get back to that later on. So do not underestimate soft power, because of course right now, and I'll get back to this, we tend to look at it saying, well, soft power is far from us. But anyway, before his death, he just used to say, he reminded us this talk from Stalin about the Pope. The Pope, how many divisions? And he said, well, you know, maybe we said that, but the Pope does exist still, whereas Stalin and the Soviet Union, as you know, has collapsed. So we already mentioned in X the issue of soft power a few years ago, but the world has changed significantly, and the meaning in the first, because war, in the strong meaning of this word, you know, weapons are being used now, and clearly it replaced soft power. You'll see it's not that simple. And with the it is the time now from the, you know, power struggle and, you know, and the use of weapons, and of course nuclear weapons. So we should mention the notion of defense and investment linked to this, with the objectives for Europeans to spend 5% on defense. Now, back to soft power. Of course, we have to go back to Donald Trump, who clearly stopped with that. You know, he's done, you know, he doesn't mind, actually. He decided to go for coercion. He's moved to Machiavel's side. Machiavel said it's better for the prince to be feared than to be loved. I'm not sure that Trump has read Machiavel, but never mind. You know, his advisors probably, and he considers that soft power is useless. It's a rupture with the previous values, the ignorance of ideas, the attack against universities, which goes with the end of the Paris Agreement on climate, and the drastic drop of some given to the World Health Organization. And of course, this will be huge impact. There will be huge impact on the possible pandemics and global pandemics. And of course, USAID being disengaged, you know, the U.S. Development Agency for International Development, created in '61, which is the main provider for international solidarity. And from the on the media side, well, I have to say it, the will to dismantle Voice of America, created in 1942 as a counter-propaganda media. I won't dwell on this topic because, you know, we could talk about that throughout the meeting, but and there is still soft power, but with a new set of cards and new players. And so whereas the US abandoned it, others are actually fostering it or using it. Russia is a bit complicated because the propaganda work, but right now it is is no longer credible. But anyway, there are countries where it's still acting in Africa. And of course, the Chinese policy in terms of soft power, very well established, very well constructed. Ever since 2007, the Silk Road, the new Silk Road, the Confucius Institute, and so on and so forth. Korea, with there are young people here, the K-pop, and not, which has a Korean, Southern Korea, very dynamic condition, and the other countries that we've underestimated in the history, and which now develop a true capability for soft power. And in that respect, I would like to insist on Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which combine cultural soft power with major transformation there and a more diplomatic soft power. Very little time. Okay, a couple of words. I want to mention the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates, Noura Al-Kaabi, who says that this transformation is, and it's complicated, values of peace, tolerance, openness in a country where there are 200 nationalities. We can see that this step on the side done, and those are new countries, and these also are new tools, and I think it's most important to say it. And we'll get back to that, and especially around artificial intelligence. What do we do? Is it a soft power tool around the stops? Okay, the standards, the general regulation for RGDP or public policies, and which makes it possible to establish GAFA norms, which are hated by the US, but not the GAFA understands. And again, it is one of our tools for soft power. We talk about all that. Thank you.
Merci Françoise.
Thank you, Françoise. We can give her a round of applause. So, Pierre Lévy, would you like to react to Françoise? You were ambassador of France in Russia. You're very familiar with Europe. The fact that Trump's United States has renounced soft power, is it a way of renouncing a form of power? Well, first of all, thank you very much to the Rencontre d'Aix for inviting me. I'm going to try and contribute to this debate by giving my point of view as a French and European diplomat. In the world that you're describing, I believe, Europeans are very much alone. And that's what's important to take into account. Sorry. And just to summarize the problem, such as I see it, what soft power do we need in France and Europe in this very difficult world? And let me come back to what Françoise Benamou was saying. When we diplomats, we talk about smart power, it's not soft power or hard power. It's something else that you use to weigh down on international realities. So it's a tool, and that's why I think that as part of this thinking, it's important to differentiate between what is state policy, so development, external cultural action that the French Cultural Institute might carry out, and then the narrative, the storytelling with respect to the project that we have for the rest of the world. And then atmospheric soft power, the brand of a country, tourism, etc. Second remark now. To understand the problem, I think we have to understand the forces underlying the world. There's a combination. There's the logic of globalization that we're familiar with, trade, the bringing down of borders, networking, attractiveness rather than coercion. And then there is the question of geopolitics, the power struggles, the conquest of space, of natural resources, everything that we have that comes from Washington. And then to answer your question, we can see what's happening. Françoise mentioned different examples. So maybe it's a way for Americans to shoot themselves in the foot. So if you like the United States and you want to study over there, maybe it's a way of putting them off. How do we decipher what it's doing? Maybe President Trump just considers that politics are silly and that they channel a certain ideology that is not his. Diversity, other values. It's not just an American problem, though. It's a problem that has to be faced by the whole world. And dismantling US aid has created lots of problems in terms of collective actions in the health field, in the field of development aid. So it's really very important to keep all of this in mind, because the American approach, in the narrowest sense of the term, is going to continue, very much centered on itself. So as Europeans, we don't know what to do, and we're feeling very much alone. And it's important to keep that in mind in our thinking. By simplifying things to the extreme, I can say that we are faced with the choice of either staying as we are by reasserting our values, insisting on the application of the rule of law, and not having an impact on the changes underway, or we can try and be the strongest and we can rival the United States, but we might not weigh in enough on changes. Then there's the fear of losing our identity. For Europeans, that's a fundamental problem, and it means that we have to review the notion of power itself. We need to have the instruments of hard power, military and defense systems, especially faced with the Russian threat, but not just that threat. There's the transatlantic problem too. We've got to develop all of our soft power tools, and there are a considerable number. It's a soft power, but it's not a gentle power. Soft but not gentle. Is it the European model that is being exported as soft power? Democracy, the social model, the environment, all of that is part of our European soft power. Is that going to be Europe's soft power? Well, you have to keep in mind, if we take the common factors underlying European actions, they are considerable from a normative point of view. I listened to the American expert yesterday, Kim Roll, I think his name was, at a round table, and nobody believed what was being said. He said that what you're doing in digital terms, we don't like. So the single market for digital tech, and that's soft power? Yes, it's normative power. When we try and export democracy and the market economy, it's the same thing. Beyond that, there's the brand of each country, the attractiveness of each European country. Another well-known example is the Erasmus program. So I think it was withdrawn, no? It's not just for getting European students to travel in Europe. A lot of Erasmus focuses on third countries. And foreign students who come to Europe, well, the last examples are not very well known. So there are French secondary schools abroad, for example, but they've been abroad for a long time, no? Yes, they're across the world. There are about 400,000 pupils in these schools. 30% of them are foreign. And there are lots of people in these countries who send their children, the representatives of elites, but not only, because the schools are a lot cheaper than American schools or the schools in other countries. So this is something that I've seen. It's a considerable instrument of soft power. Vladimir Norov, you used to be in charge of diplomacy in Uzbekistan. What is your reaction? We're trying to focus on Central Asia when the American power decides to cut off US aid and all of that soft power and focus only on hard power.
Hello. Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to this forum.
What's your mic? Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this panel session. I'm first time here, and I'm impressed by the level of organization and high professionals of speakers. If we're coming to Central Asia after independence of our country, breakup of Soviet Union, have now two dimensions of hard power and soft power. First, internal, and second, external. When we're talking about internal, we faced some ethnic clashes, some civil war in our countries when it was tried to impose their control over a region by some political and religious centers, and at the same time former rulers of region. And what is important to say that between Central Asian countries, it was the same situation, not so soft. And for example, I worked as a Minister of Foreign Affairs in time of first president, when we had the very strong dispute over our borders, which not delimited, over the transborder rivers in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, when these countries wanted to construct hydropower station, and Uzbekistan position was strong against construction these two hydropower station because it could damage our interests. So at the same time, we use it in this time, any platform, United Nations on any, to strongly reject to this. And it brought certainly misunderstanding. It worsened the relationship between two our countries, between neighboring countries, for example. We place it on the
big neighbors, right?
They're now our neighbors, Yes, Uzbekistan with Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, for example, first of all. On border with Tajikistan, we placed the mines, and 100 people died on the mines. And the same why, because the terrorists tried to penetrate in this time, and it was a serious challenge. But at the same time, with the coming to power 2016 new president, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, he completely changed it. He focused on soft power. First, he said Central Asia, it is our priority. Second, all disputed issues we should solve on the base of common compromise with the interests of both sides. And we, for a short time, resolve it of problem, which was some prediction by Brzezinski that Central Asia, it is Balkans. The same predicted some conflict in the area over the water, over the border issues. But now this old issue, we resolve it ourselves and support it to our two neighboring countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, find solution for delimitation and demarcation. Today, the Central Asian countries try together to find solution to all problems by this policy of President Uzbekistan when he proposed such platform, consultative meeting of head of states every year in each country where we can talk about the problem. Today, we focus it on creating by the common market, by the same time people exchange. For example, in time previous 7 years before, from Tajikistan, people could not come 20 years to see their relatives in Uzbekistan. Today, all this visa abolished, And now it's without foreign passport can people move. And every year now, Uzbek-Tajik border crossing perhaps 1 million people. The same with Kyrgyzstan and other neighboring countries. So,
and that's soft power.
Yes, it is exchanged. When we're talking about external challenge of external, it was Afghanistan. When we witnessed 40 years of war. Why? Because after collapsing Soviet Union, Soviet military was taken out, but at the same time, American military, American forget about Afghanistan. Only wake up when 2001, 11 September, terrorist act in New York, then it was used hard power, the military power. But I think it was such misperception by American side in this time, by George Bush time, because there was such conception that American fight to two fronts, to two directions simultaneously. That's why after not resolved issue Afghanistan, they began fight in Iraq, spending several trillion in Iraq, and at the same time, perhaps 1 trillion in Afghanistan. But at the same time, all this money spent to reshape democracy, to reshape human rights in Afghanistan. But sometimes this approach not working because it was different societies. Using the power, hard power, not working too, and after spending so much money, to power coming again Taliban. It is interesting situation. That's why we are in our relationship with Afghanistan focusing on soft power. We established a special free trade zone, 20,000 hectares of land on border with Afghanistan. And nevertheless, we not recognize it as government, but we're working with this government. And our president recently met the head of interim government of Afghanistan in Azerbaijan in some summit there, ECHO. At the same time, where without visa, Afghan business people can come to work. There is hospital, there is hotel, they can have everything, service. At the same time, we on board established a center for education, training, 300 young men and young girls of Afghan. We're educating 17 professions. We're supplying Afghanistan by electropower. We constructed railroad, and now we're working with Afghan government to construct railroad to Pakistani seaports, Peshawar, Karachi. So soft power we began to use mostly, and it working, and we have some concrete result. For 7 years, trade turnover rises of Central Asia 2 times. Investment, the same to our countries, rises 2 times. And internal trade rises 4 and 5 times.
There's a problem with the microphone. Ah, yes, it's working. So soft power, well, Uzbekistan understands that it's a very useful tool, soft power. Now, Naima Korshi, you're very familiar with Africa, you're Moroccan, you're a very much engaged diplomat when it comes to reconciliation, when it comes to diplomacy between African countries. What is the consequence for Africa of the withdrawal of US aid? What about soft power? Is it seen as a weapon by some African countries? Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you to the Rencontre Économique for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here to talk about Africans. Often in the West, we talk about Africa and not Africans. Now, I have been able to meet up with policymakers, but I've been in the field as well. I worked with the international organizations. I started with the UN, and now I work with the African Union. But I also work with civil society. I have a foundation focusing on African women's leadership. So I would like to talk about the way Africans see soft power in the West, because that's what we're talking about. When we talk about soft power, we were talking about Trump's soft power. He was pretty brutal. So he uses the media. But it's not just Americans, it's the French, the Germans, who have lowered their humanitarian help. So So what is brutal, what is shocking is the methods used. Out of the 70 billion aid for development, 20 billion goes to the African continent. So obviously, this can only be disastrous for Africa. American aid focuses on vital sectors like health. It finances projects to fight against HIV in southern Africa, maternal help, malaria. So there are thousands of people who lived thanks to this. The HCR budget, it represents 40%, and from one day to the next, it was stopped, which is disastrous. There's a second point. This didn't leave room to others who are going to take over. Well, so there is place for others to take over, but it's going to take time. So what's interesting is to raise a debate about the fact that this foreign aid has stopped. Maybe it is time. There are intellectuals who are writing that it's an opportunity for Africa. It's an opportunity to push their governments to focus on key sectors and to stop all of this assistance that came from the West following colonization. There's even criticism. People are saying, well, okay, there's a story that's rejected by African intellectuals that says we have the impression that we're living off charity, of European charity, no, it's an investment. Even if you send help and vaccines and medical products and bags of flour, they're not sent to Africans, but to foreign companies. So it's an investment. The beneficiaries are also companies who ship products. So it's not charity. Stop saying that it's charity. Let's take a concrete example. I am lucky enough to work with about 30 or so African countries, so I'm very familiar with the field. Imagine a village where 3/4 receive flour free of charge. Who is going to buy the flour in shops? So there's a lot of criticism saying that perhaps it's an opportunity to rethink things. Nigeria, for example, has recently increased aid for health. Maybe this will drive certain countries to rethink things. There are, of course, fragile states. There are conflicts. I was in Sudan. I spent a year in Sudan. There are countries that are very much fragile because of these conflicts. But in other states, there is this opportunity. Rethink the aid. So like Morocco, for example. Yes, I was going to come to Morocco. So the United States has withdrawn. It's an opportunity. Everybody's talking about China and Russia. China is already there in terms of infrastructure. It's a different kind of help. The Chinese are building. If you go to Africa, the buildings, the stadium, they're all Chinese. They're very much present. Even if you go to restaurants, it says, well, you've got menus in Chinese. So what's really great is that in terms of soft power, there are African states, and I'm proud of belonging to Morocco, that we have soft power. We are leaders among other African states. I studied in Paris, and other Africans dreamed of going to Paris, but now it's not the case. So now we have competing universities in Morocco. We have campuses that are really extraordinary. You know, they're just as good as a university campus where I did my studies in Morocco. There's a lot of specialization in mediation, in the fight against radicalization. There's a foundation for imams to fight against radicalization. There are students, so diplomacy is also cultural. Morocco is now attracting big international forums. Every month we have a big forum. So Morocco has become a place where people want to go. Anyway, my time is up.
So there is a traditional pattern in our students to say that the North gives and the South receives. No, it's not that. There are also investments in African countries, and this is of it creates a lot of problems. There are a lot of European decision makers, and I belong to the 2 Euro continents, did not, because of they were talking only with the decision makers, and many were replaced by Western intellectuals. Well, they were replaced, they lost contact with civil society, and they want something else. And if you see the debates in the civil society, well, it's time for us to deal with our future, and we choose our fate and what type of governance we want. And women are very dynamic, and we have, we sit in the many NGOs are led by women. That's essential in inclusivity to this dynamism. Sujiv Shakya. It's not often that we have someone from Nepal, which is between India and China, so two large countries. The soft power on Chinese side is very important. Now, how do you deal with it? I mean, is soft power a weapon for Nepal as well? And what is the Chinese influence? We talk about, the loss of U.S. influence. Do the Chinese keep going, and do they still invest in soft power in this part of Asia?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So just as to set the context, I come from Nepal. It's a country of 30 million people. If we were in EU, we would have been the 6th largest populated country. But in between 1.4 billion in China and 1.4 billion in India, we are seen as a small country. And who else can better think and talk about soft power? We face it every day. And when we look at soft power, I like to give a bit of anecdotal examples. So when I was traveling in a village in Western Nepal, I saw a bunch of young people doing TikTok videos. And then I was talking to them, and they said that, China is the #1 technology company in the world. They make the best equipment, they make the best, platforms, and no wonder 30% of our bandwidth is consumed by TikTok. That's what is evolving. That's what is changing. The same thing, when my daughter started driving, we have a BYD at home that we bought last year. And I think the same experience I had in driving Tesla in the United States 10 years ago. That's what you think, that China is there. That's where the perspectives are coming. And when we are talking about, and the same thing we discussed about Korea, if you look at Netflix, after Hollywood, Korea is their next big production base that is producing a lot of series. So when we come to, especially looking at India and China, my perspective is that soft power can be transformational and soft power can be transactional. When we look at China, we see them engage very quietly, looking at long-term gains. As I said, China likes to look at its penetration in 20 years. But when you look at India, they want to see results in 20 hours, and it doesn't happen. And that's where we see stark differences, and that does create geopolitical challenges. That does create challenges for us, because then we face things like economic blockade from India. So these are, and that's the perception. So if you talk to any young Nepali under 25, for them, the blockade of 2015 is very much in their head. So it's all about how soft power is, for me, is about perception. And sitting out there, looking at China, and looking at how innovation is taking place there and how they are communicating. That's also the difference. And the other thing that's changing is that till 2000, we did not have Chinese tourists. Now about our 4th largest source of tourism comes from China. And it's not only, if you look at Thailand, about the 21 million people Bangkok gets, a lot of them are coming from China. And tourism does change. People are forced to speak Mandarin. Shopkeepers are forced to put in Chinese signages, talk about, have facilities to be able to pay in Alipay, in WeChat Pay. So these are the new transformational stuff coming up. And when we talk about soft power, the other thing I talk about is also that we need to look at 20 years, 25 years from now. A lot of us may not live to see what soft power that today China is getting into is going to have the impact. If you look at Africa, 2.4 billion people in 2050. Now, I've been writing on 2043 about what these things would happen. So what they are doing now impacts things in the 25 years. So if you sit back in 2000 and we look at internet exploding, everybody had to read English. All the codes were in English. All your social media tools were in English. You have to do search. It was all sitting in Nepal. Everything was in English. Today, Google Translate is there. There are a lot of other translation mechanisms. Today, you can travel across the world using different languages. So the power of English is also waning. So these are multiple things that we see. And as we look at soft power, we need to look at the art, culture, literature. So we look at food, we look at contemporary culture. And that is what I feel that is changing. And for us sitting out there, China is one factor, but it's also to look at soft power in the long run, soft power, the way it is transitioning, and to look at new lenses to look at soft power. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Franco Bruni, you're an economist. Your reaction to what's been said for you, soft power, economists to be part of soft power in Europe? Thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy for this. I'm amazed by this beautiful organization in this park. I would like to apologize, but I shift to English, but I do believe that in economy, English is still, is another soft power, even in economy.
To take a very specific point in the few minutes I have, and I would like to argue that contrary to what academic textbooks say about economics, economics has, academically, its economic incentives are considered hard power, like armaments. Still, I think that there are reasons to consider financial markets, a specific section of economics, as provided with interesting soft power, for at least 4 reasons. Let me list these reasons in a very schematic way, then if we have time we can discuss it.
Micro.
First, it's the simpler one. It's the classical thing that financial markets discipline firms and governments in going into debt. So if you are a bad debtor, in a soft way for a while, and then in a hard way later, financial markets will try to convince you to become a better borrower, a more credible debtor. We know this very well in Europe, in Italy in particular. In this moment, for instance, in Italy, we have a government which is criticized for many reasons, but in terms of finance, because of the behavior of our treasury has been very prudent, we are acquiring a credibility which is absolutely out of tradition. And the reason is that we are disciplined day after day by financial markets. And this enters into the decisions of the government in a very interesting and soft and convincing way. Second reason, it's a bit software, if you want, as a reason for finance being a soft power. Finance circulates everywhere, and you cannot stop it. And it links countries in very deep ways. It doesn't matter which country, you can try to stop it. But while trade in goods can be really stopped, trade in finance is much more difficult to stop. And with modern finance, modern financial techniques, digital finance, etc., it's practically impossible to avoid that finance goes everywhere. And this creates a link between all the countries of the world. And if you have some soft power, you can channel it through financial markets. If you are able to put your soft power in finance, it will go everywhere. The third reason, well, obviously soft powers, this is also in textbooks, can be good or bad. You can also have bad soft power. And we know that finance has tremendous bad things in it. I mean, there are injustices, inequalities, non-transparencies, etc. But, I mean, criminals channel their funds through financial markets. So this is bad soft power of finance. But if you can reverse it, if you try to improve on this in these fields, you will find a positive soft power. I mean, the defense of transparency in financial markets is incredibly important. We economists, central bankers, etc., spend an enormous amount of time trying to improve transparency. And this has a cultural effect on the rest of the economy. So you can, and by the way, it's true that mafia goes through financial markets to, wash the funds, but it's also true that the police uses financial markets to find down the burglars and the mafias. So, okay, finally, the last reason why, and this brings me to Europe, because everybody's been speaking from various points of views in the world, but the European issue is, well, finance, if you have a deep and well-functioning financial market, that's something good for the world. Now, just imagine that Europe is able to build really what we are trying to build, that is a deep and well-organized, unified financial market. This would be extremely precious for the poorest countries, the more indebted countries in the world. They could have in Europe a financial treatment which is much different to what they now get in a financial world where American banks dominate. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Pierre Lévy, back to you. Of course, you may react to what has been said. So, interesting to see finance, according to what Franco Bruni said, as a vector for soft power, assuming that we're able to create this unified financial market. But anyway, diplomacy is part of this soft power. But when we look at budgets today, well, budgets in Europe are, go towards military expenditures. There is a war in Ukraine. There is the Russian threat. 5% of the GDP for defense, security the expenditures for all countries which are already in difficulty, France or Italy. So when can we talk about soft power in Europe? Finance can be an example, but it's going to be long-term. Diplomacy, has diplomacy still a role to play? We feel that it is no longer invested in diplomacy, where it was to soft power, to prevent war initially. I do hope so, but I would say that the first quality of a good diplomat is his ability or her ability to take the stand of the other. What strikes me in the discussions we have here is the fact that it allows a French diplomat or European to have a decentralized vision of the issue of soft power, not just a European or Franco-French vision. We see through your various talks, we have a different perspective from Africa, from Central Asia, from Southeast Asia, and therefore it's very useful. It's very useful. So I think it's most important. This first condition for the return of diplomacy that you mentioned. Second, I do believe that we must try to combine the two types of instruments or tools. Let me remind you that the European Union is 42% of public aid to development in the world, global. That is $100 billion. So when we talk about augmentation of defense expenditures, and especially following the decision made after the NATO summit, I find that good. It's a good thing. But simply, I have a question though. Shall we keep the old scope of tools to precisely stop war, prevent war? Because often it's more easy to go to war, it's more even complicated to finish it, but anyway, to go to war than to try to prevent a conflict. And I have many examples in my personal experience, because we've been able to avoid disasters, especially in the Balkans in the 90s, but simply because indeed we used European credits or national domestic credit to prevent the conflicts. But simply, it's very difficult to persuade someone to make the effort, because you can always find someone who will say, but anyway, this conflict was not going to take place. This is a point that is important. We have to keep the whole scope of interventions. Third comment, if you allow me. What is interesting to me in our discussion is to see that soft power is a site for confrontation. and for competition among ourselves. Competition between languages, of course. We push for French, and you know, French, English, Spanish, German, Chinese, whatever. Competition between education models, competition between political models. When we export democracy, well, we want to foster diversity, promote women and fight against domestic violence. So we have to keep this dimension in mind to show that it's concrete. And then finally, and that's important, back to the term I used initially, the narratives. It's a very fashionable term, the big story. Everybody wants to have its own narratives. Like, for example, Russia has set its fight against Ukraine, which denies the independence of a country, and it's a multipolarity fight and the fight against neocolonialism. But in all cases, it is important to compare the reality of the discourse, the words, to the actions. And this is where I think our friends coming from other countries have a role to play to dismantle a discourse. You talked, Madam, about the end of assistant of aid as a sort of post-colonial system of assistance, but from assistance to pillaging, it's there is difference. And when I say pillaging, I'm referring to the action of Wagner militia in Africa, for example, which was pillaging resources to provide the protection to dictators. So each time it is most important to compare these words with reality. One example I experienced when I was in Moscow, the Alliance for the Future. It's a project developed by the United Nations in the fight against for the achievement of millennium goals. The goals of millennium, Russia did not join. So what does it mean in that respect? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Soft power is far from being dead. It's even competitive now when we hear you. Mr. Norov, with neighbors like Russia and China, is AI part of the new tools? We talked about TikTok. That's an influencing tool for China. Uzbekistan would like to become some kind of a hub for AI. Again, you're trying to radiate elsewhere, to have an impact elsewhere?
Thank you very much. China now became one of the leaders in developing AI. DeepSeek showing that by small money, you can do such big advantage, which brought to lose by big tech companies unite $1 trillion. I worked 3 years in China as a Secretary General of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It was COVID time when I could see as big tech company, Tencent, Alibaba, they resolved this problem, reduced number of deaths. By which way? If they tested one man infected, during 1 hour, 100,000 could be isolated immediately because maybe they will be infected, and it allowed to have less death cases than in Europe or in the United States. But if looking to the women, gender equality, I am impressed by marketplace, their e-commerce, more than $1 trillion in China, but 55% they are involved with women. When I go to the street, I could see the young lady riding the very luxury car. I thought maybe they're daughters of billionaires. But in reality, this self-made, they in e-commerce participating. But China, if we're looking rising power of China, concern everywhere in the this way in our countries in beginning. The same was when I was minister in the first president.
C'est une menace pour vous?
Is it a threat for? Is it a threat for you? Do you see it as a threat?
This beginning, it was such misunderstanding the China. It was more narratives that spread it by mass media, the China rising threat and so on. And China is our neighbor from Silk Road. We have the common history in Silk Road. It was not China traded on Silk Road. On Silk Road traded our people, because our people now logistic, languages, and can take a risk. Chinese, it was goods, but trader was our people. Today we see reviving this. China is One Belt, One Road, help it to us countries, landlocked countries, Uzbekistan, double landlocked countries, sometimes 60% of price of our goods when we importing, it is price of transport. It is very serious. And what China is saying, if you would like to be rich, you should construct the road. That's why yes. And 140 billion China invested in Central Asia last 30 years. 41% it was spent for infrastructure. That's why for last 10 years, China could possible to transport to Europe and back 1,700, 10 times more trains. But at the same time, European Union invested 138 billion. But for transport infrastructure, only 4%. You see, but why middle corridor not working? Because Traseka program, which in beginning encouraged it, because European Union for us was an example of social democracy, social economy, and market economy. We wanted to be more integrated with European Union, but unfortunately, we had no chance to do because our trade turnover with European Union, Uzbekistan, all these 30 years, 4 billion, now it's rising at 5 billion. But with China, we have 10 billion more trade turnover. It is important, and that's why we propose it, to cohesion, One Belt, One Road, and Global Gate of European Union. It will be in inter-Central Asia, where countries which have the big potential for both sides, for European Union and for China the same. We see that China actively using AI. AI for why AI this became evolving. Yes, we are soft power. What is soft power? It is culture, education, it is people to people. So, but at the same time is evolving with the new technologies AI. Now China very usefully using for bringing its narrative with the mentality, culture of each nation, because they are different nations. They are different culture, different this. For Muslim countries or others, they are different, and they can by generative AI they can propose some policy which will adjust it to this. Very skillful, and I think that European Union the same can do with other countries.
Donc l'Union européenne a quand même une place, si je comprends bien, en Asie.
European Union has a role to play in Naima Koshi to talk about these new instruments of for the influence of soft power. You've seen artificial intelligence. Chinese are very strong, of course. In Africa, there are influencers, so that's also the true soft power that influencers who relay. Well, this is soft power or official country, but it's new, so it uses TikToks, Instagrams, and all social networks. Well, exactly, because we talk. This discussion we have on soft power shows us mindset, because soft power is culture, is Western culture, which was attractive. I even went to countries which had no diplomatic relation with the US, or we, would go to McDo and look at films. Now there is a questioning of the model itself, of the Western civilization, because access to social networks, people have to have access directly to the events. So this is the debate, the discussion we have today, that the population today is informed about what is going on and question this Western model. I'm not against the West because I'm between France and Morocco, but to reflect public opinion in Africa, it goes beyond public aid to development. There is a challenging of the values, because when we see that Trump doesn't respect the justice decision values, which are justified colonization for civilization, international law, which do not exist because it is impunity. So there is a challenging. That's why Africans. There are a lot of discussion between African intellectuals to see what new models for development, because they don't believe in the one that has been imported. That because artificial intelligence, Africans, I know there is TikTok, but ChatGPT, but to go the idea of Morocco last week. We had the first Moroccan discussion for. So at the African level, there is dynamics. The budget relies on wants 10 billion euros for digital plans. So within Africa, there is. So we have to digital tools to inform and to have a share of this information, just information and demography. No, of course, we have to take artificial intelligence, even within this economic discussion. Several panels have been dedicated to artificial intelligence, and we don't want this to come from the north, even the Africans. And I say, we have an institution, and I will, but we have money to, okay. So to talk about artificial intelligence, this is something which is important, which is, in the African countries, and the example in Morocco, but, they have the necessary funds to have a information which corresponds to society. Sorry, time is out. No, c'est... No. Sorry, translation has to stop. 2 minutes. So it will be very short, sorry. Quickly, Madam Sujetsaka, for these tools and the influences, very rapidly, 2 minutes. Why soft power? What are the new tools that we use this?
So the new tools that are saying influencers.
Les influenceurs.
So social media influencers is something that are new tools. Tourism is a new tool as people start discovering countries.
Le tourisme, ça fait partie du soft power, en fait. Oui.
Yeah, tourism is a big part of this. And the other is art, culture. It's about food, culinary journeys. So those are going to be the new way of soft power. I think finally the thing is that soft power itself, the word itself, we need to introspect to say that what does it mean? Because that's also a Western definition. So we have to look at new ways of looking at soft power. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Un tout petit mot de conclusion. Ça va être Franco Bruni.
Je dois tirer des conclusions dans
enfin,
1 minute.
1 minute sur peut-être le soft power en Italie. On reste sur les valeurs sûres là.
Le soft power.
The soft power we have now on this side of the is to let the program go and move on to the next presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Just one word, because 3 words, new competitions, war of narration, solitude of Europe, and soft power, which is a central element of the transformation of the world. Thank you.